This is a case that, let me tell you, Brandy, I can really relate to it in the sense that I love the state of Alaska. I've been to all 50 states many, many times in my travels with law enforcement all across the country, and Alaska is at the top of the list. And I have the utmost respect for the Alaska State Troopers. They have an almost impossible task, and they do it every single day. And in this episode, we're going to take you on a journey profiling into the life and crimes of Robert Hansen, also known as the Big Game Hunter, a serial killer who would kidnap his victims, drive them or fly them to remote locations, strip them naked, and then let them loose only to hunt them down like wild animals. And I want to welcome in my co-host, Brandy Diamond. And Brandy, we've had killers like truck drivers and delivery men who picked up their victims in one spot and transported them. But this guy is moving them so he can let them loose, hunt them down, and kill them.
I
What do you think
know.
about
Wow.
that?
So, it reminds me of, I feel like there's been a Netflix show about this somehow, right? Like game hunters putting people in places they're not familiar with, having them basically defend for themselves. So to me, is he comfortable then with being in remote areas? Is he trying to confuse his victims because they don't know really where they are or the layout of the land? And so this guy is playing a game. This is a big game to him that he's playing with, and he just lets them go and run and hunts them down, John. Unbelievable.
To me, was this Hunger Games
I
decades
know.
before
Thank you.
Hunger Games? Really?
Yes.
I mean, this
Yes,
guy
that's the
was
game.
doing it for enjoyment.
Enjoyment, absolute enjoyment. And we're going to talk about more, what makes this show different, John, which is the profiling piece of this. Would you, as we get through this, are we going to see is he more organized? Is he disorganized? Does he know the lay of the land in these places that he's bringing them to, which is very unfamiliar to them? So let's go ahead and just dive right in.
All right, here we go, Brandy. Hi, I'm John Matthews, veteran law enforcement officer, winery owner, and your host for the podcast version of True Crime and Wine. And I'm pleased that you've joined us for this unique podcast where we feature the fascinating world of serial killers while we enjoy award-winning wine. And why serial killers and wine? Well, it's simple. I'm the only winemaker in the world that's ever captured a serial killer. So it's real true crime and real wine. And each episode, myself and Brandy Diamond, the popular podcast host of Texas Wine and True Crime, which you can also hear on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, etc., she joins me, and together we take you on a journey profiling some of the most interesting and intriguing serial killer cases from all around the world. Yeah, not just the U.S., all over the world. Well, of course, enjoying some of our favorite wines. Now, I've got my favorite Casaro wine today. It's our multiple award-winning Montepulciano. But we're going to talk about that a little later. So pour yourself a glass of Killer Cabernet or maybe Murderous Merlot and join us for this podcast version of True Crime and Wine. And as always, if you share the show with your friends and other true crime lovers, have them subscribe, like it, or leave us a review. We always appreciate it.
Okay, John, so you mentioned the fact of how much you love Alaska. You're very familiar with the lay of the land. So let's get into the case background.
Yeah, so the case took place in the 1970s, 1980s. And at that time, the Alaska pipeline was fully under construction, right? There was a huge oil boom in the state. Thousands of young men went up there to work on the pipeline. And the pipeline was in far northern Alaska and then came down throughout the state, but in very, very rural areas, very remote areas. You got to remember, the entire state of Alaska has very few roads. very few paved roads at all. I mean, obviously the cities and the major highway that's a big loop that connects, Anchorage and Fairbanks, but even the capital, you have to get to it by boat or plane. So if you haven't been to Alaska, there are very, very remote parts. And so you're sending these young men up there. They go to these work camps, basically. They're working on the pipeline, days, weeks at a time. They get a break or a sabbatical, and they all come to Anchorage, right? There's very few major cities. They all fly back into Anchorage. That's not a good mixture. Young men, nothing to do, a lot of money, a lot of cash because they're getting paid well from the oil company. And what do you have? Drugs and prostitution soon followed. It inundated the city. The Fourth Avenue district was the district located in Anchorage with bars and topless clubs and prostitutes. There was not just a huge pool of men that were cash rich, but it brought in hundreds, if not thousands, of young ladies, prostitutes, topless dancers that came in to earn their money from these guys that were huge. So you constantly had girls arriving, girls leaving, girls disappearing, girls getting arrested. Conditions were really perfect for a serial killer.
So I have never been to Alaska, but I actually have a couple of friends from Alaska, and they say very similar things about what you say. I'm thinking about the years, right? So we're talking 1970s to 1980s. This reminds me, John, a lot of like going off to war and then going into the city when you have time off, which had prostitution, which had women, which had alcohol, which sometimes they did things they shouldn't have done being in the military. This reminds me of like there's just not much to do or places to go, right? This is a very restrictive area. And you're right. I mean, my dad, I grew up with a father who was in the pipeline construction business. I mean, he was on the road all the time, Middle East, Alaska. They have a lot of money, a lot of time, even though he had a family back home. You don't get to come home every single time you're on sabbatical, like you said, right? So you have a lot of playing time, a lot of time to get into things you probably shouldn't. So absolutely right. This is setting it up. Perfect environment for a serial killer.
Yeah, because you've got all these guys that are there real transient. They're drawing in all the women. The women are a huge victim pool, right? Again, the women are as transient as the guys are. And that creates the perfect conditions for a serial killer. But let's go back a little bit. Let's talk about the serial killer, Robert Hansen, and his early years. And you're going to see some similarities here. As we have been profiling these killers over the first season and into the second season, we're starting to really see some obvious similarities pop up. And that's where we generate these profiles from, right? It's different buckets so that we can kind of figure out what kind of killer are we dealing with and narrow down that pool. So he was born 1939. He was a scrawny kid. We've seen that before. And he had a physical ailment. And, some of these guys are small and skinny. Some are huge, Ed Kemper size, right? Keith Jefferson size, 6'7", 240, 250, really, really kind of imposing guys. And his physical kind of issue was he had a bad stutter. On top of that, his face was really scarred from severe acne. Well, you can imagine. Here's a young man, scarred face, bad stutter. He's not going to be popular with the girls. He was teased and he was rejected by the girls in his early years. So some of those things, when we look at profiling, we're already starting to check some boxes.
Yeah, you and I talked before we started recording about just so many similarities we already see in these cases. I would like our listeners, to reach out to us. Do they see a pattern in these? Again, physical ailments, not being accepted by your peers, right? Being made fun of. But we also know, John, those happen to a lot of kids and they don't grow up to be serial killers.
Right,
So,
right,
right?
exactly. And that's why there's so many different boxes we got to check here.
That's right.
And in law enforcement, we call it totality of the circumstances or the nexus. Where are all of these things coming together? In and of itself, one or two or a combination of 10 may not make a serial killer, but it's certainly going to start pointing us in the right direction. And we see this in his young adult life too.
Yeah, and we talked about this as well. We need to start making a list of everyone that is in the military that then becomes a serial killer or a serial killer tendencies, because this is a theme. And again, he only serves 1 year. So let's talk about his young adulthood.
Yeah, and again, let's make sure we don't want to offend any of our military listeners out
Oh
there.
gosh,
But
no.
no, but we're certainly seeing a pattern, and I think these guys are reaching out for some stability, right?
Agreed.
They're
Okay.
kind of a loner. They're ostracized. They don't fit into society well, and I think maybe in these young years they're reaching out at 17, 18, 19, saying, "I want to go in the military. I'm looking for a connection." Unfortunately, I think they don't find it and they don't fit in, or they start committing crimes and then we see they're out, right? He entered the Army Reserve but only stayed for 1 year. He was married, however, in 1960 in Iowa, but he burned a school bus barn. He was mad, upset, and he burned the school bus barn down and was sentenced to 3 years. He only served about 20 months, but his first wife did divorce him. Shortly after that, after he was released, he was remarried again to a very devout Christian who had two children. And in 1967, they decided to pick up and move, kind of get a fresh start, and they moved to Anchorage, Alaska. And it was there that he opened a bakery. And he was really liked by the community. The bakery was popular. He apparently was a fairly good business person, fit into the community well. And he was a hunter, a big game hunter in Alaska. Let me tell you, if you want to hunt and fish, that is one of the best places in the world to go. He even set several local hunting records for the
Wow.
big game that he got up there.
Wow. I mean, now this is all starting to make sense. He has hunting awards and that's how he's growing up. So that to now I understand why that's comfortable and in his comfort zone and what we're going to see later on.
Yep. And, when we start looking, start putting together the profile, we don't check a lot of boxes. Some of these killers, literally from the get go, right? You and I start
Right.
checking the boxes. He is a loner. He does have a physical issue, is isolated, with his stutter and his acne, does go in the military, tries that out, really doesn't work out there. We don't know of any like young substance abuse issues like we see with many people. There was no indication that I found of any sexual abuse, sexual assault, child abuse. We simply, we've seen that a lot in the past. So most of his really centered around his social skills and
Hmm.
how he fit in with everybody else. And certainly, we really didn't even see any petty crimes in his early childhood days.
I was thinking of just like serial killers in the past as well, of like coming from good families, right? Parents actually being interviewed after they've been caught, talking about the way they've grown up. So we a lot of the ones we've covered, we see that there is a lot of abuse, there is a lot of red flags very early on in their life, but not all of them have that. Not all of
Nope.
them are brought up in bad homes and terrible parents. So another interesting thing, John, maybe we can talk about one time about how that nexus works, right? That you talk about all the time. You kind of have to have the perfect combination.
Yeah,
Um,
when were those seeds planted? Because we
Good.
don't always know everything
That's
about
right.
their early life, right? Even though
That's
we
right.
can research it and look into it, you can't kind of open that person up and go, did you have some traumatic incident when you were 7, 8, or 9? Was there some precipitating stressor when you were 13, 14, 15? We don't
Yeah,
know. We don't know
that's right.
all the time. But what we do know is that in 1971, women began disappearing in the area. Now, again, you're talking about a lot of young men, a lot of women, a lot of money, a lot of prostitution, a lot of drug dealing. There could be a number of women that disappear for a number of reasons, but they start to see an uptick in 1971. We also know that he was arrested for kidnapping and attempted rape of a housewife. And then the rape of a prostitute. So two arrests fairly close to each other. He pleaded no contest um, to the sexual assault, but pled out to, possessing a deadly weapon and assault with a deadly weapon. So he was sentenced again. Another one of these plea deals, right? We see him
Mm-hmm.
over and over. The prosecutor maybe can't prove or have all the evidence for the kidnapping and the sexual assault, but he's like, we caught you with the weapon during the, and if you want to plead out to it. Anyway, he was sentenced to 5 years, but spent 6 months. Um, One of
Mm.
those patterns that you and I have certainly noted in other presentations, and we're going to see that continue with Robert Hansen.
Yeah, being sentenced to years, only serving months, having them where they need to be, but then letting them back out on the streets. So after that 6 months, John, we start to see some escalating crimes in the area starting in 1973.
Yeah, that was after he really got away with the rape charge, right? He
Yeah.
pled guilty to the assault with a deadly weapon, but really got off on not one but two rape charges. And we think he became empowered and became a serial rapist at this point, picking up dancers, picking up streetwalkers, prostitutes, and paying them for sex or raping them or both, depending on what he felt that night. And certainly we see this pattern starting with the women in 1973. Now, as we know, these killers evolve, their crimes evolve. Sometimes they're actually caught for other crimes not related. Well, he was actually caught with one of those in a local store, Fred Meyer's. And everybody up in Anchorage, if you're listening, they know Fred Meyer's. It's a huge chain grocery store up there, and more than a grocery store. It's a grocery store. It's kind of a combination of a large grocery and a Home Depot, Lowe's
Mm.
all together. Well, he was arrested for stealing a chainsaw. And again, he's sentenced to 5 years, but it was reduced by the judge to time served. And while he was in jail for the short amount of time he was in there, he was given a test and diagnosed as bipolar with manic depression.
Mm.
So now we're starting to he's got maybe some mental health issues. He certainly has a need for and desire to commit crimes. Again, many of these guys start off committing thefts. We know that there's thefts, but we also know there's weapon charges. We know there's rapes and kidnapping. But 1976, he's still out there walking the street. He then stages another crime, and this is kind of unique for serial killers. He says his house was burglarized and received a fairly significant settlement from the insurance company. And he used it, I guess, wisely. He expanded his bakery. But this does fit into the context of other serial killers that we've seen. We've got evolving crimes. We've got crimes that involve theft, that involve like embezzlement or fraud, in addition to the violent crimes like kidnapping and rape. So we are starting to see it. We didn't see it in the beginning, but we are starting to see this kind of pure profile emerge.
Yeah, and John, the one thing I think about with the burglarizing, the fake burglary and the insurance settlement is like his ability to con, right? His ability to get people to believe him, which is going to have to come into play when he convinces women to fly somewhere they're not familiar with or be somewhere they're not familiar with. But it's starting to we've seen that in other cases as well, their ability to pull the wool over others' eyes.
Well, that sociopath personality, no empathy, no remorse. So during the day, you got to remember, so he's raping, kidnapping, stealing at night.
Mm-hmm.
He expands his bakery because he's got a popular bakery. So most of the people, the vast majority of people that know him as what? A married man with 2 children that is a local businessman, that is a popular bakery, that's popular in the community, and he's very well known and popular at the church where his wife is a devout churchgoer. So we start seeing these emerging sociopathic personalities of good guy, good community member, good person during the day, and a not very good person at night.
Yeah, it's we've covered those too, and we'll cover future ones of these men who are living to the outside world very good, decent lives and never would suspect them, right? I wonder if he carried the tea cakes in his bakery, but from our previous but we'll move on. So he's going now, John, from rapist, and then eventually we know he becomes a serial killer. So when does this start to transition?
Well, so we were already up to like 1976, where he's already been arrested a couple of times, spent some time, let go early, released early from jail and stuff. The first murder really dates back to 71. Remember earlier I said that's when girls started disappearing. Now, he was never tried and convicted of that, but let's look at the circumstances of 18-year-old Celia Van Zetten. Okay, we think that was his first murder victim because on December 22nd, 1971, so in line with our timeline, she was kidnapped. Well, she was found frozen to death in the wilderness after escaping from her captor. And her body was found on Christmas Day. So, okay, you really don't know anything 1971, but looking in retrospect, and we're going to talk about Hanson's crimes, as Hanson is evolving, this could very well have been one of his practice victims, right?
Right.
He picked up a prostitute, he transported them to another location, had sex with them, right? And then killed them or tried to kill them. Now, I couldn't find out any other information on Celia's death other than the cause of death was weather and freezing to death. Maybe he didn't have a weapon. Maybe he did have a weapon. Maybe he shot at her. But certainly, this is a really rare type of death. 18-year-old kidnapped, all of a sudden turns up in a very remote area, frozen to death. And so I think you're going to see he's starting to evolve here. And I think this evolution continues throughout the 1970s, starting in 71, and then continuing with the other victims.
One thing I thought about going through this, this victim is if he can't, if she just escapes or if he lets her go to chase her down, right? That's part of his game. We'll talk about that. But does he think the elements will get her if he doesn't? Like, is he hoping that they're so unfamiliar that if they escaped, they'd be able to identify him, to maybe tell them where he was located, where they were located, where they ran from. But if they get away and they're not familiar with the area, they'll succumb to the elements and they won't be able to identify him. So that's something that popped in my head with just like she escapes, he doesn't maybe worry too much about it. The elements gets her, and then she's found. So
Or
very
or
interesting
maybe
thought.
or maybe he tried to murder her and failed.
Yeah,
Maybe he didn't do a good job. Maybe he didn't have the right weapon. Maybe he wasn't ready for it.
exactly.
Maybe she fought back. A million different reasons. But to me, this has all the elements of a typical serial killer's practice kill. And we're going to talk about in just a minute one of his other early victims. Now, as you know, on each episode of True Crime and Wine, what would it be if we didn't feature wine? And each week we feature one of our Casaro winery brands. And it's fitting for this week to share with everybody what I'm enjoying right now. And I've been enjoying through the show. I can smell it. I'm sitting here talking, doing the podcast, and the aroma is just wonderful. This is a dry red wine. It's our Montepulciano. It's a medium-bodied red with soft flavors of boysenberries and blackberries. It's absolutely magnificent. It's one of our favorite wines, one of our most popular here at the winery. It's 100% Texas grape. It's awesome with pizza, with pasta, and it's a multiple award winner. I think it's got 14 international medals. Yes, just this one wine, 14 international medals. So, and of course, there's no better way to enjoy our Montepulciano than when you're listening to your favorite true crime and wine podcasts. And like all of our wines, you can find them at casarowines.com, CASSARO wines.com. Salute.
Okay, John. So we've now started to talk about how he's transitioning from that serial rapist to serial killer. And then we're going to get into Agglutina Annie. So let's talk about her for a little bit.
Yeah, that was actually a body that was identified in 1980. Construction workers were digging a building site, actually, and they found a shallow grave under some power lines off of Agglutina Road, which is a road outside of Anchorage. The body was never identified, and they just kind of nicknamed her because of the road, Agglutina Annie. And she was approximately 25 years old, and well, actually anywhere 16 to 25. They don't know. White female, stabbed in the back and killed. She was a small woman, long auburn hair. She did have jewelry on. She was wearing some knee-high red and heeled boots, the old 1970s knee-high boots that they had. She had jeans and a brown sweater, so she was dressed. And she had been buried a significant time before, so there was only skeletal remains. And the Alaska State Troopers, at the time they discovered her, put out a flyer to the citizens and said, does anybody recognize this woman? They thought maybe the black boots, with the red on them, might
Yeah.
stick out. They thought some of the jewelry might stick out. But as it turns out, nobody did identify her. But again, here we see a victim that is out in a remote area in a shallow grave. So we're starting to see a little pattern develop here.
Yeah, and I also thought about the fact of, we talked about how women were transients as well in this area. They were coming from all over. So maybe, maybe that the right people just didn't see this face or jewelry, and maybe that's why she was never identified. And 16 to 25, that's two separate times in your life, probably doing two separate types of things in different areas. So sadly they never could identify her. But then, John, now we've
But
got
having the jewelry, Brandy, what does that tell us? What does that tell us?
I mean, just
It probably
having
wasn't a robbery, right?
No, definitely not trying to
she had
take
her jewelry
anything.
on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, she was also dressed and clothed.
Right.
Which is, interesting as well. Did they redress her? Did they put her clothes back on, place her there? But yeah, there's lots of pieces of jewelry left from this victim.
But was she dressed for the elements? Probably not in Alaska. Yeah, so she
Good thought.
probably
Good
had an
thought.
outer coat or some other coat on that wasn't
Mhm.
discovered. Yep.
Very true. All right, so let's get into, we're now in 1982, not long after this. Sherry Morrow. Let's talk about her.
Yeah, she's the first known victim that's really tied to Hansen. She was a topless dancer, and she was discovered near the Knit River by two off-duty police officers. They were out there hunting, right? They were on their day off. And they found her remains and they said, wow, these look like human remains. We need to call in some help. And the remains were scattered over a fairly significant area, probably scattered by animals, because again, it was really just her bones. They did bring in DPS and excavated the site, and they determined it was a young female. But here's where it gets interesting: a young female in a remote area down by the Knit River. She had been bound and blindfolded, and
Mm,
she had been shot 3 times. Now, officers also recovered a spent 223 casing near the scene. And a 223 is a rifle cartridge. And so you're going to see that out in areas where hunters go,
mhm,
because that is a very common round used in weapons up there. It took 2 weeks to identify her. And then investigators recalled that they had actually recovered two other unidentified bodies over the last 2 years, not far from there, including Eklutna Annie that we just talked
mhm.
about. So officers walking around off duty, hunting on their own, come across these human remains. And within 2 weeks, not only do they identify her, but now they go from 1 to 3 victims.
Yeah.
So we're starting to see this is one of those comfort zones for a killer.
Mhm. Well, and they're starting to piece it together, I feel like pretty early on, which is, they're starting to think of the other unidentified victims. And, again, it's like they find the bones. But then I know, one thing that stuck out to me about this: blindfolded and bound, right? So is this person now is he now bringing weapons with him? What, did something go wrong in his first few that he realized he needed to have more, uh,
A better
control over
advantage.
them? Yeah,
Yeah.
advantage over them in a way. So that's the one piece I see kind of changing here.
Yeah. Did that earlier victim get away?
Yeah.
And he decided, wow, maybe I'm not as good of a hunter as I thought I was. Maybe I need a better advantage. I need to blindfold him. And maybe he was carrying a handgun
Yeah.
during the first murder. Maybe he had a knife. Now he's up to a 223 rifle. He has a significant firepower advantage. He's going to be able to hit them from a distance. So he's putting all the chips in his corner, you might say.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think it probably had to do with something that didn't go right, like you said, with the previous victim who had run off, or who knows how many he had before that was
Right.
able to escape, or he just figured, okay, I'm not doing this right. But so we're definitely seeing a transition in that behavior.
Yeah, and we're definitely seeing practice kills, which is not uncommon
Hmm.
at all. They're evolving and trying to figure out, how do I get this high from this
Hmm.
murder, right?
Right. And some of the MO that we're seeing in the serial killers, like you said, with him, we didn't see it completely early on. We're starting to see it now, or in his early teen years, evolving with the victims. He's bringing some weapons with him. His comfort zone is women who, I think we see this a lot, John, of maybe not being missed. Maybe they are, runaways, or they don't have anybody looking for them. Anything that else that's kind of sticking out to you about this guy?
Yeah, the profile's definitely emerging. White females, late teens, early 20s, Probably he finds them in the fourth district. They're runaways, they're prostitutes, they're topless dancers. They're in town making money off all those guys that are there that have a lot of money to spend. Very transient population. So, from a victimology standpoint, it's becoming very evident who he's going after and where he's finding them, right? He's going to
Yeah.
the fourth district. He's finding these women, but it's still quite unusual, that he's taking them to a remote location. How's he getting them there? And now we have a blindfold and we have them being bound, all added into this, as well as we now know a weapon being at least one, a 223 weapon. So when we start, we now got a pretty good idea of victimology in our profiling. We start looking at the killer. We have a really good idea of at least the weapons he's using lately, finding the
Yep.
casing. We don't know if there's torture, but certainly having a bound victim is different and a blindfolded victim is different. Many of these women were prostitutes, so we're not sure if it was, consensual sex or sex for pay, or if
Mhm.
he's raping them. But certainly his body disposal is something else that we're identifying. Here, at least two of the three victims have been put in a shallow grave, right? So
Okay.
that means I'm clearing a little area. I'm going to kind of cover them up. I'm not spending a lot of time. But he's not leaving them out in the open, and he's not putting them on display. So we're
Mhm.
seeing some of these behavioral characteristics of this killer emerge. And then comfort zones, you and I always look at, where did he get the victims? Where did he kill the victims? Where did he leave the victims, right? We always look
Yep.
at three different crime scenes. Well, now we've got it narrowed down. We pretty much know victims are coming from the fourth district, and we're seeing a pattern along the Knit River of where bodies are being left and being found. So, from a profiling standpoint, it's starting to kind of come together a little bit.
Yeah. And the next victim, Joanne Messina, we're about to talk about, she's also found in a shallow grave in a gravel pit. So let's talk about Joanne Messina a little bit.
Yeah, the police started really kind of looking around that area, right? Now they're like, hey, what's going on? And they discover her, and she becomes the second known victim that we can tie to Hansen. Found again in a shallow grave, right? So try to conceal her, but not really. Didn't pose her, didn't leave her out in open. She was a cannery worker from one of the local factories, and actually, somebody last saw her leaving with a red haired man and his dog. That's really all the information they had. Um, officers did discover, though, when they examined the body, that she also had been blindfolded and she was killed with a 22 caliber handgun. So now we've got a handgun in play, we've got a rifle in play, but certainly, so those are two different weapons. Serial killers use different weapons, we know that. The key here is that she was blindfolded and taken to this remote area and placed in a shallow grave, really tying the crimes together.
Yeah, and we also know he is, I don't know if, I mean, yeah, I guess I could call him a professional hunter. He did win awards and he was involved in competitions when it came to hunting. So, not surprised, he probably has multiple weapons and guns that he uses
Right.
to hunt different types of animals. So, yeah, we're definitely starting to see a trend there, especially the blindfold, John, which is not as common, right, as other things you would do to a victim, but you know, they're going to start seeing this pattern.
And so that kind of leads us up to, this was 82, and this leads up to 1983. And this is a head shaker, right? This is a head shaker. This is one of those times in the case that you just go, oh my gosh. So let me
Mm-hmm.
kind of paint you a little picture here, Brandy. June 13th, 1983, a young prostitute, right? Cindy Balson, was spotted with handcuffs on her wrist by a trucker. He gives her a ride to a motel where she waits for her pimp, but then also calls police. Thought that was a little strange, but okay. When Anchorage police arrive, she says that a man offered her $200 for oral sex, that he handcuffed her, and he forced her at gunpoint into his car. Okay, so now we've got kidnapping at the very least. He then drives her to his house. How brazen is this?
Yeah.
And he rapes her and tortures her.
Okay.
After that, he puts her back in the car and he drives her to the airport, the municipal airport that's very close, and put her in his bush plane. That's what he was going to do, and said he was going to take her to the wilderness. Well, he was loading supplies in the plane. She escapes. Now, let me sum this up for you. Here's a woman they found in handcuffs, partially clad, that says she was kidnapped, raped, and tortured. She gave officers a detailed description of his house and where it was. She gave them a detailed description of Hansen. She saw the plane and described the make and the color and was smart enough, right? Okay, let's think about it. She's already been raped, beaten, and tortured. She's handcuffed in the backseat of the car. She's smart enough to look at the tail number and memorize it. You think that's a lot?
I mean, she's our, she's an eyewitness. That's the victim as well. I mean, you can't ask for a better witness,
right?
You know?
Pretty solid witness. Oh my gosh, if I had this in 10% of my crimes,
right,
in my career, right? You're always talking to a witness. Oh yeah, he was short, fat, tall, skinny. It would, all over the place. She remembers the place she was raped and tortured, the suspect, the plane, the airport, and the tail number of the plane. So she's kidnapped, raped, and tortured in the basement of his house. At one point, he chains her by the neck to a post in the basement so he can take a nap. He then puts her back in the car and takes her to Merrill Field. That's the airport in Anchorage there. And that's where she heard him say, "I'm taking you to my hunting cabin on the Knit River." She heard him say that. So as he's loading the plane, she escapes and runs towards 6th Avenue. He chases her, but as luck would have it, a truck is passing by, sees a partially clad woman in handcuffs, and stops and picks her up. So she gets away. She was even smart enough to leave her left blue sneaker in the back seat of his truck as evidence for the police. This is open and shut, right? It's a done deal.
I mean, let's all take some tips from Cindy Paulson. If you're ever, looking at numbers, looking at your area where you are so you can describe it, once you can tell police where you've been. I mean, she did everything right. She was resilient. She, was able to flag down a truck. She's able to escape. She leaves evidence behind for them, right? She leaves evidence behind. And gosh, John, please don't tell me this is going to be another case of a prostitute that they question him, they find out who he is, and he denies it, and they don't believe her? Or were we headed in that direction?
We've been down this path before, haven't we?
Not with the good as Cindy Paulson, though. Cindy was good. My gosh. I mean, man.
The evidence is overwhelming, isn't it?
Overwhelming.
So they bring Hansen in, right? Because she described him, the plane, everything, the house, it all matched. They bring him in. He denies her accusation. He says that, yes, I was with her. Okay, I admit to it. So he was pretty smart on that. But that she was trying to extort money out of him. And that's all he wanted was sex. because of Hanson's meek demeanor. Remember, we said earlier, little, scrawny, small guy, right? Non assuming, acne, glasses, a stutter.
Yeah.
Kind of makes me think of when you and I were talking about Keith Jefferson and how
Hmm.
intimidating that would be to women. This guy's
Yep.
not intimidating at all. So, because of his meek demeanor, his humble occupation, well, what do you do for a living? I'm just a baker. I own a bakery shop right down
Hmm.
the street. You probably have been there, right? The community loves it. And he had an alibi from a friend from church. The police let him go.
Oh my gosh. Unbelievable. Again, had him right where we needed him, and discredited because you are he said, she said, right? I'm a family man. I own a bakery. I am a, I'm giving to my community. I am a, but then you have her, and that's her job, right? That's sometimes that's the perception is embezzling, a prostitute wanting to get more money out of, the John or whoever she's
This
with.
meek little
Yeah.
baker. Yeah.
Yeah. Why would it, and he says he was with her. So it's okay that she knows where he lives, that she knows what his basement looks like, that maybe she was at his plane. So those things make that now would make sense of, so yeah, gosh, again, it's like, who do we believe? Him or her? And they believed him.
And the thing that really made them believe probably is Paulson refused to take a polygraph. I don't know why.
Okay.
She had all of the information. She
Wow.
basically did everything right, but she refused to take a polygraph. And so the officers went, it's a he said, she said. She's a prostitute. She's a known drug user. She was probably trying to rip him off. He is an upstanding member of the community in the business, and he's a church member. And they just decided, we can't file charges. If she had just taken a polygraph, right, to
Right.
verify what she was saying was true, because it was all true,
Mm-hmm.
it probably was going to be a different outcome. Law enforcement was almost forced to release him, but now he's on their radar.
Yeah. That's unfortunate. And I almost wonder, just from a, did she feel like they didn't believe her, like they should have just believed her, like all the information she had, and then leaving evidence behind. And now she's got to go that one step of just taking the poly. Did she think that maybe they'd ask her other questions about other things she was involved in that she didn't want to disclose? Like, that's kind of where my mind goes with
Yep,
that. Are they trying to catch me in something else? Am I
exactly.
gonna am I gonna be in trouble for, are they gonna say I made this up and lying to police? I mean, who knows what she's thinking at
Or are
that
they
point?
going to ask me about drug use and where I get the
Yes.
drugs and do I sell the drugs and do I rip off tricks? And are they going to then charge me with the robbery? So, yeah, I'm sure all of that was going through her
Mm-hmm.
head. And again, in hindsight, you kind of look back and you say, if you're the polygraph examiner, you got to explain to her, I'm only going to ask you questions about this one incident where you're the victim. We're not
Yeah.
trying to get other information to file other charges. And if so, that'd be somebody else's job for a different day, a different time, a different place. But we want to know about this. If you'd like to join me for an in-person interactive evening of true crime and wine, just go to Eventbrite. That's right, the ticketing app, and search Casaro Wines. When you follow us, you'll be notified by Eventbrite of all of the latest shows, both at Casaro Winery, throughout Texas, and all around the country. Our in-person show is about an hour and a half, and it's your opportunity to ask all of your true crime questions to someone who's actually captured and profiled a serial killer. So go to Eventbrite ticketing app on your mobile phone or search Eventbrite on your computer. Look for Casaro Winery and join me at our next in-person true crime and wine. We'll see you there. Salud.
Well, she didn't take it. So, but you just said that now he's on the radar. So, how are detectives and police talking about him at this point? What's their next move with
Yeah,
this?
and so now we've got Detective Glenn Froth of the Alaska State Troopers, who I told you I love, and he was looking into the cases of Eklutna Annie, right, who they still haven't identified, and Messina, who now they've identified, in Morrow, and they were all in the same general area of the Knit River. And he said, I think we've got a serial killer. I think we've got somebody who is dumping bodies here, and maybe we haven't even found all the bodies. And he reaches out to, one of the most famous profiler in the world, reaches out to the FBI and calls John Douglas and says, can you please take a look at this and tell me, something that would help us in the right direction? Well, Douglas invented profiling, basically, certainly wrote many books on it, is the driving force behind the Netflix series Mindhunter. Everybody knows him from that, if they don't know him from his other books and TV shows and movies and everything else. And he says, hey, I looked at the case file. I think you're dealing with an experienced hunter. Boom, check the box.
Boom.
Low self esteem. Remember, scrawny guy, loner,
Yep.
isolated. Boom, check the box. History of being rejected by women. Remember, acne, the
Mm-hmm.
whole deal. Check the box. He has some physical issue, Douglas says.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure, but it could be something like a stutter.
Mm, he's good.
Boom, check the box. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And that he'd be compelled to keep souvenirs. Because
Mm.
what does a big game hunter do? He
They
keeps
take their kill.
souvenirs, right?
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
and the mount the heads on the walls and
Yep.
all the rest of that. So right here, Douglas kind of hits it perfect.
Mm-hmm.
So armed with this information and the information from Paulson, that's when they go out to this whole area of the Knit River to start looking for more bodies, start looking for more clues. And what do they discover?
They discover in 1983 they have another body and they identify her as Paula Golding. They know she was abducted, John, in
Yep.
April of 1983. But again, we're starting to see she's stripped naked, she's released, she's hunted down, she was shot in the back, then she's redressed, which I mentioned earlier because
Yep.
I thought, okay, they have clothes on, but there's sexual assaults going on. Then they're probably being redressed, and she's found in a shallow grave.
Yep. So every one of the boxes. Now they know for sure what we've got a serial killer.
Yep.
He's dumping the bodies in the area. When I do the show live, I've got a map and I kind of show people the map and everything. And it's amazing in such a small area where he's dumping all of these bodies. And so now investigators are, wait a minute, how is he getting the victims to this remote area? There's no roads. Well,
Mm.
in Alaska, they use airplanes like we use cars down here, right? Because there's so few roads in the state of Alaska. And I wish I could remember the fact that I read when I was up there. There's less roads in the entire state of Alaska, which I think is 2.5 times the size of Texas. It's about 1/3 of the entire U.S., but there's less roads in the entire state of Alaska than even a minor metropolitan area. So
What?
yeah, it's absolutely amazing. When I go up there to
Oh.
train police, I base out of Anchorage and I fly everywhere. I fly to a hub city, and then from the hub city, there may be some roads in the hub city. There may be a couple of paved roads, a lot of dirt roads, but then we take boats, we take snow machines, 4-wheel vehicles to get into the villages and the remote areas. So now the assumption is he's picking him up in Anchorage. He's putting him in the plane. He's flying him to the Knit River. Well, hey, what suspect did they have that we already know had a victim that said the guy was trying to put me in a plane and fly me to the Knit River? right?
Wow. Love it. I love that they're like stopping and thinking and like not trying to look for someone else that's not an upstanding community member and owns a bakery and all these things. But yeah, they're honing in on him at this point, which is great to
And
see.
it was, was it Golden? It was the Paulson.
Hmm.
Paulson was so descriptive. That's what broke everything open. So even though they didn't believe her at the time, she refused to take the polygraph. The detective stayed on the case and kept following up. She was so descriptive. He's a guy. He had a car. He took me from the 4th district. He took me to a house. He raped me. He tortured me. He was going to put me in a plane. I was leaving from Merrill Field. He was going to take me to the Knit River. So she really blew the case wide open. It just didn't happen in 1982 when
That's
they
right.
found her. So what do? They go back out, right? They've got all this notes. They've got this, record on this guy doing this. They bring him in for questioning and execute a search warrant on his house, his plane, and his vehicles. And in the house, they find a collection of weapons, which you'd expect to find in a hunter's house, but it includes a 223 Ruger Mini 14. Where have we seen that before? It was the
Yep.
weapon, and they matched it to the casing found at the Knit River that he used to hunt these women down with. They also found just what Douglas talked about, an entire collection of souvenirs,
Mm.
IDs, and jewelry taken from his victims. And if that wasn't all, they found an aviation map with locations of where he buried the bodies.
Mm. Well, at least they're finding evidence. He's not trying to hide it. I mean, they went in and got a search warrant, found the jewelry, find the aviation map. I'm assuming because of this aviation map, maybe they were able to go look at other locations, these other marked locations that maybe they haven't visited yet. But all of it's starting to come together, and they find the 223 Ruger in his house.
Yeah. They matched the Ruger. The FBI took it, matched it with the casing that they found. So yes, the case is really kind of coming together now. We see the MO of the killer, that he picks him up in the 4th district. He uses his car, transports him sometimes to the house, sometimes straight to the airport, and brings him out there to what we now know he has a hunting cabin on the Knit
Hmm.
River. That's where he's flying to. He's blindfolding him. He's handcuffing him or binding their hands in some way. So he's getting a distinct advantage, stripping them naked. So now they've got to run through the forest naked and blind. That's not much of a hunter.
Yeah,
I,
no,
I
he's,
mean,
yeah.
is it because he failed so many times
Hmm.
previously? But to me, that's not very sporting like. He's a murderer anyways. We're not saying he's got any morals or values, but even from a hunting standpoint, he's binding him, he's blindfolding him, he's stripping him naked, and releasing him out there. Some of the prostitutes he offers money and then they go with them. Others he lures them, and still others he kidnaps just at gunpoint. We know he's taking souvenirs now, just like Douglas said. And he's got the aviation map, but we've got how many victims, Brandy, at this point? 4?
4.
I think
Hmm.
it's 4 victims.
Yep.
Guess how many X's were on the aviation map?
Oh my gosh. 20.
What? Yeah, no, great guess. I mean, because we know that, right? When we know of 3 or 4 victims, we think there's
Crazy.
got to be 20 to 30, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of serial killer math. 21 kill sites were on the aviation map, and they were marked with X's. Literally, I've got a copy of the map.
Oh my gosh.
Um, he said that he killed 17 women, is all, not the
Okay.
21 X's. But then he says, oh, and by the way, I didn't kill everyone because there's at least 30 others that I took out there and raped. or had sex with. And if they did what I wanted, I would bring them back. If they
Wow.
didn't do what I wanted, I would blindfold them, bind them, strip them, and hunt them down.
Okay, well, that's some of the organization then. I'm starting to see that, and he's disclosing this to police, right? We didn't know that, but and police didn't know that as they were kind of collecting this information, but now we're starting to see that he had a plan and
A
he
very
was
organized
a
killer.
very organized killer, a very organized plan, marking the spots. I think that is a souvenir as well. Maybe looking at that map
Oh,
and
yeah.
reliving that right in his mind over and over. So things are really starting to come out in this guy as police are talking to him.
Yeah, and now police are just absolutely mortified because it goes from what they believe 3 or 4 victims
Mm-hmm.
to 21 or
Yeah.
more. And then when he starts talking about the rape, so, we told you in the 70s and 80s that transition from serial rapist to serial killer. So now we've got 47.
Mm, mm,
And do you think that's the correct number? 50,
no.
60, 80? I mean, I don't know what it would be when you tally up the rapes and then the murders. But now we know exactly what was going on. We know from a profiling standpoint, we've described his crimes. His victimology was very consistent. The prostitutes, runaways, women in the 4th district, his MO of transporting them, of torturing them, raping him, tying him up, of hunting him down. And now we know his geographic profiling too. Comfort zone, 4th district of Anchorage, comfort zone at his house when his family was gone. We discover he would take him to the basement. And when the family was there, he'd take him straight to Merrill Field, load him on the plane, fly him out to the river. So now we've got the killer's profile, we've got the victim's profile,
Mm-hmm.
and we've got the geographic profile kind of, nailed down here. He picked up the prostitutes, mid-teens to early 40s. If they didn't go willingly, he'd abduct them, take him to the house. Oh, and by the way, the basement was soundproof.
Oh
So
gosh.
he would rape and beat the women there. And he used hammers and broomsticks at his house. When they were cooperative, he'd let them go. When they weren't, he would put them in the plane, take them out to his cabin, which he nicknamed the Meat Shack.
The meat shack.
Yep,
Oh my,
yep. Um,
unbelievable.
yeah, and then he'd let them loose in the wilderness and hunt them down with that 223. Like you said, he also had a 22. He had several weapons, and would kill them. After he killed them, then he would take his trophies, right? He didn't take
That's
their
right.
heads back and mount them, but he took jewelry, um, and he marked those burial sites on a map. Because, like you said, he could use that map over and over again to relive his crimes.
Okay, so we know about the 21 X spots. He's admitted to the sexual assaults. Gosh, it's a lot worse than I think police maybe were expecting to hear, right? Of what they had and then what they uncovered actually talking to him. Now, he's going to be arrested. He's eventually going to go to trial, but John, how many murders is he actually convicted of or charged with at this point?
Well, the police know of the 17 that occurred from 80 to 83, and he admitted to that. And, I've got in front of me, all of the victims. And actually, we can see 71, 73, 75, 80, 81, many in 80, many in 81, many in 82,
Yeah.
many in 83, all the way up to the time of his arrest. He was formally charged with 4 murders and the rape of Cindy Paulson, with those great details she gave. He showed the burial sites on a map in exchange for serving his time in a federal prison And in the plea agreement, he wanted to avoid media publicity. And that was actually written into the plea agreement. And so he said, hey, if you send me to federal prison, not state prison, and we kind of keep the media wraps on this, I'll admit to these four victims. He did take them out, though, in a plane. This time he was in handcuffs and showed him 17 of the burial sites, but for whatever reason, refused to help them with four others. So there were 17 X's, 21 X's, 21 burial sites, but only 17 he took them to and said, yeah, these are mine. They kind of theorized that the other four, maybe they weren't prostitutes, they weren't strippers, they weren't runaways. Maybe they were other people that he kidnapped and hunted down, but he wasn't proud of it. And so he refused to help them with those four. Again, that mind of the serial killer, you can never, ever figure it out. You can't put rational, reasonable expectations into it because they just don't work, right? So
Yeah,
he admits
right.
to 17 of the 21, but he absolutely won't admit to the other four, even though he took them to the location and they're on his map.
Mm. I don't guilt. There's something shame. I don't know what it is, but there's something there
Maybe
that
he didn't kill him in the way he wanted to.
yeah,
Maybe he abused them. Maybe he beat them badly. Who
yeah,
who knows? Who knows what it was? But for whatever, we've seen this before, right? We saw this
right.
with Cottingham, the Times Square killer. He admitted to, or he was convicted of 18, but admitted to what he called 80 perfect murders, and we
Mm,
think his body count's over 100, but in
yeah.
his mind there were 80 perfect. Maybe in this guy's mind there were 17 perfect.
Okay. Yeah, I can. Yeah, something's there. Then, like you said, we can sit here all day and try to figure it out, but we're not sociopathic serial killers, and so we might be sitting here a little longer. But John, he is eventually convicted
Yep.
February 18th, 1984, sentenced to life plus 461 years, John.
Yep, he's not going anywhere, Brandy. The courts up there don't play around. They sent him over to Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. Eventually, he was moved back to a correctional facility in Alaska. And in 2014, at the correctional facility, he did die of a undisclosed but lingering health condition at the Alaska Regional Hospital. So he was never going to get out. He was never, ever going to harm anyone again. But I do love to read that conviction. Life plus 461 years. That's justice for a serial killer. And again, like we've said so many times before, by day, he's a normal person. He's going to church. He's a father. He's a husband. He runs a bakery. He's a popular community leader. And by night, he's a serial killer who kidnaps his victims, flies them to a remote location, binds them, blindfolds them, strips them, and hunts them down like animals. So I hope everyone enjoyed our presentation of this week's serial killer, the big game hunter, Robert Hansen. Now, as we put a cork in this edition of our True Crime and Wine podcast, I want to remind listeners you can follow us on all of our socials at JJ True Crime and Wine, and you can sign up to receive our wine through our wine club at casarowines.com, so you can profile the killers each week with Brandy and I and enjoy some great wine. So I think this kind of wraps up the business for today. And of course, I want to thank my co-host, Brandy Diamond, as always, for joining me on this journey. Great job today, Brandy. Our producer, Lauren Bedso, back in the Corsicana Command Center for helping to make this show possible. And we'll see you next week when we present Robert Brashers, a serial killer best known not for his serial crimes, but one horrific night in Austin, Texas, where he murdered 4 teenagers in what's now commonly referred to as the yogurt shop murders. I'm John Matthews, and thanks for joining us today on True Crime and Wine. Salute.